You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, a podcast geared towards marketing professionals in higher education. This show will tackle all sorts of questions related to student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and so much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where the industry is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. My name is Troy Singer, and as always, I'm joined by the co-host of the show, Bart Kaler. And we have a very special show for you today because of an interest or maybe a deep dive that Bart went into. We're going to talk about Generation Alpha with Mark McCrindle from the Land Down Under. Bart, can you let everyone know what they have to look forward to?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. It was interesting. I was doing a little bit of research a few months ago on Generation Z, and just thinking about it, I kind of discovered Generation Z a number of years ago, and I remember kind of starting to make reference to it, and people were like, "Hey, aren't we still talking about millennials?" And so I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, well, what's the next generation? Because I haven't heard yet. And so I did a quick Google search. What's the next generation after Generation Z? And I kind of did this deep dive into this Generation Alpha website, and I started reading about it and understanding that it's children that are 10 years old and younger right now, and I thought, wow, those kids are going to be on the bubble for colleges in just 5 or 6 years. I mean, some schools. I think we talked to Christy LaFree at Butler, and they're doing ComFlows for 8th graders, and most schools are doing sophomores. And so if you think about 8th graders, I mean, boy, they're just right around the corner from 10-year-olds. And so I thought, boy, this is going to be important for higher ed marketers to understand that we're getting ready to make another major shift from Generation Z to Generation Alpha in a few short years. And so what does that mean, and how is that going to change? Because every generation is different. So once I started digging a little deeper, I recognized that the leading authority on Generation Alpha, everything I was reading was the McCrindle group down in Sydney, Australia. And so we had just started the podcast, and I reached out I found him on LinkedIn. His name's Mark McCrindle. And so I reached out and said, "Hey, Mark, I'm pretty interested in Generation Alpha. I've downloaded your book. I'd love to have you on the podcast." So he graciously agreed. And so we're going to have a great conversation about what Generation Alpha is and how that's different from all the other generations and how that will impact the way we market to them.
Mark is interesting, and he is a wonderful, charismatic speaker. I've gotten to listen to him online a little bit, and I can't wait to bring him into the conversation. So without further ado, here is Mark McCrindle.
Okay, we're excited to welcome Mark McCrindle, principal at McCrindle Research, to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Bart. Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you too. Tell us about your work and your organization.
Well, it's called McCrindle Research, and we focus on analyzing human behavior, looking at communities, understanding sentiment. We have a particular focus on generational research because the times that one generation went through shape them differently to what another generation is going through. So we look at those differences, and that has applications in the education market, in organizations as they think about attracting and retaining staff, just in the broader community as well. We do a lot of demographic analysis that helps understand changing populations. So it's social research, demographics, and looking at the trends generationally and what's to come.
That's great. That's really fascinating. I discovered your information and some of and your organization when I was doing a Google search. I've been pretty fascinated with generational research and how that applies to marketing, especially higher ed marketing. It's something that we do a lot with personas. When I just started to kind of do some research on what was the next generation coming after Generation Z, I discovered your website and your book, Generation Alpha. And I'm pretty amazed by, the idea that I think a lot of the people listening are just like, wow, we just got used to figuring out what to do with Generation Z, and now you're telling me I've got to pivot to another generation. And so tell us a little bit about what you've learned about Generation Alpha.
Yeah, well, these generations span 15 years. So, that's about the maximum time within which you have a shared experience. Beyond that, you've got a new generation. So, as you said, the years have flown by, and Generation Z or Z, they're the children of millennials, and they are Generation Alpha. Now, having worked our way through the alphabet with us Gen Xers, and then there was Generation Y or millennials, Generation Z after that. We've got a new start, but it's not going back to the beginning, not going Generation A. We're deliberately calling them Alpha, using the Greek alphabet now just to give the signal that it's a new naming category for a new generation fully born in this new millennium, and they're quite different to even the generation that went prior to them. They will be the largest generation globally in the history of the world, the most digitally supplied generation ever, and that's evident to see, but the most materially endowed, a massive rising middle class right around the world, and the most formally educated generation ever. So, a lot of great blessings and benefits they have, and understanding them right now is pretty important.
Okay, that's really good. It's good to have that basic understanding of Generation Alpha, and just the idea that they are kind of going to bring a lot of transformation, and the idea of what they're going to bring to not only the workforce and to society, but as they're starting to look into higher ed. I mean, most of them, I think you've mentioned that they're 10 years old and younger right now. They're going to have some skill sets and some skills that they're going to bring into their life that I think we as higher ed marketers need to kind of be aware of, because in 6-7 years they're going to start being on the sophomore list, on the junior list of some campaigns that we're doing. I've talked to some schools that are going as low as 8th grade to start recruiting some students. And so I'm just curious, what are some of those skills and those traits that they're going to be bringing that we should be aware of?
Well, firstly, it's about understanding the context, the times that are shaping them. That's really going to help us get a good understanding of them. And we sometimes think, well, we're living in these times too, these times of the digital and these times of global connection and social media. But, the age at which you're exposed to a new technology or a transformative event determines how embedded it will become in your psyche and lifestyle. And so for this generation living through COVID, adapting to digital, connecting on social media, being influenced through these new channels, it's a different experience for them, and it will impact them profoundly. So what we are talking about is a generation that are social in terms of the influence channels of their life. It's not just what the authority figures or the experts tell them, but the peer group. They're global in that connection. They're digital in the tool. They're visual in how they consume that content, not just the written form anymore. And of course, mobile in lifestyle and where they will work and where they will study. Far more mobility for them. So those characteristics are at a new level compared to even the generations that are just a little bit older than them. And we see these same traits right around the world. And as part of this book on Generation Alpha, we surveyed both the parents and these youngsters in several countries, and we found the same characteristics and expectations wherever we searched.
That's really fascinating. I find it fascinating that that you see a lot of trends throughout the world, and I guess that kind of goes and points to the fact that we are much more of a globally connected world than maybe some politicians have tried to lead us to believe, and the way things are. And so I think it's really interesting that even those traits are kind of being seen in different parts of the world. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. And that's why we call them the world's first global generation, because never before have we had the technology that connects, the social media platforms that engage. The news feed isn't just the local news, but it's what's coming in on those global platforms. The search and playlists are coming in from global platforms, from Netflix to Spotify. It's shared right around the world. The buy recommendations as they're on a shopping app, from Amazon to whatever may be their preferred store, eBay, etc. It's global. And we just haven't had that before. And therefore, the friends and the connections and even just the global awareness is at a new level today. And we say that people resemble their times more than they resemble their parents. We sometimes think, well, they're our children. We know them. And we do. But they actually often will share more in common as they connect globally with each other than they may with the generation that was shaped in a different era prior.
So Let me just kind of peel this back a little bit, because I think that, because they're going to be more global citizens, they're coming and they're going to be more formally educated, and I think they're going to enter into their post-secondary and higher education in probably a more aware situation than any generation before them, from a global understanding to just the engagement that they have throughout their lifetime. Help me understand how that's going to form them into this holistic student. I mean, they're going to be more of a student that I think a lot of schools are going to be interested in, but they're going to require some things. I'm guessing right now that travel programs are going to be very important to this generation. They're going to want to be able to participate in study abroad programs, and they're going to want to be able to have a greater impact on the world through their education and through the university that they might attend. Is that kind of what you're thinking and what you're seeing?
That's exactly right, Bart. They're looking to make a difference, to have an impact, to seek fulfillment in their life in a more holistic way. And so as educators and as those engaging with them to train them in this next stage, it can't just be a focus on the academics. It can't just be a focus on setting them up for the career, because they will be multi-career. There'll be multiple jobs in terms of their future. The World Economic Forum said that 65% of children entering primary school today, that's these Gen Alphas, will ultimately end up working in job types that don't yet exist. So here we are educating them for a working future that has not yet been formed. So what we can't do is give them a body of knowledge and think that that will sustain them through their life and portfolio careers. But what we can give them, life skills, people skills, character formation, and the ability to learn how to learn, so that they can adjust and adapt that learning, so they can be those lifelong learners, so that they can future-proof their own careers, because they will have the resilience, the adaptability, the creative thinking, the critical thinking skills, the people and social skills to connect across diversity and engage in a changing world. And that's where those programs that you mentioned, from those civics programs to missions or overseas travel, where they're learning to make contributions, where they're developing those people skills, those entrepreneurial type programs. Maybe they can do internships and see the real world of work in action. It's that sort of program and structure that's really adding value to their life. And we can't think that we've just got to get them more and more in front of screens getting the learning. We've got to stretch them to new areas and skills that'll sustain them for the future.
That's great. That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about how they are going to be influenced by their parents. I mean, you said the millennials, Generation Y are their parents. How is that going to impact their decision making as they kind of enter into, let's say a search for a university, higher ed?
We find in generational studies that one generation is not normally a continuation of the last, but it's almost like a pendulum, and how one generation was raised, we see the pendulum swing back, and the next generation is raised differently. And that's what we're seeing with the millennials. If we think about how millennials were raised, they were given a bit more freedom, less structure, and they sort of made their own way in the world, and did that very well. It was the start of the internet era for the millennials growing up. There was a whole new, I guess, platform in which they interacted that their parents didn't know. But now we see millennials, as they become parents themselves, raising their Gen Alpha children, are far more engaged. They're a bit more structured around their parenting styles. They're connecting across that generation gap more than the baby boomers did with the millennial kids. And so what we have is a more, you might say, structured, informed, and engaged parenting style. The parents, as they think about their Gen Alpha children's future, are doing their research, are jumping online, are getting the information, are making those decisions around which educational pathway is going to be best, from after-school tutoring or coaching through to booking them in for the extracurricular lessons and activities. It's a far more structured upbringing. They are having fewer children. They're having children, these millennials, a little bit older in life, generally two-income earning households. So there's a little bit more discretionary money to spend, and they are investing that in the education and and upbringing of those children. So they're more informed, you may say, and therefore a bit more expecting aspirational as they raise those children. So we've got to keep that in mind as they make their choices. In some ways, the market, the client are the children, but in other ways, it's their parents who are more informed, and so communicating with them is key.
That's very, very good to know. This has been very fascinating. I guess another question that we are kind of interested in is, how is the whole notion of the pandemic with COVID, how is that impacting this generation, and what is that going to do? Because I mean, if I think about it, someone who's 10 years old who 18 months or 2 years of their life has been involved in a lockdown, or even a 5-year-old, I mean, that's 20% of their life. It's a large percentage of their life to grow up wearing a mask compared to someone our age who might be a Generation Xer or something. How's that going to impact them as they kind of enter into this next phase of life?
Well, very profoundly, because not only is it a fair proportion of their life, but it's in those key formative years as well. And so while young people have been the least impacted from the health consequences of COVID, they've been the most impacted from the social isolation and disruption that it has caused. They've seen transformations in how you can study, and online and through the digital has become mainstream. They've seen parents work from home through this. And of course, this is global, the impact of COVID, the lockdowns and the changed approaches. From hygiene protocols to just the volatility of life, that the set programs and activities were no longer guaranteed. This has had a profound impact on them. They've also seen the financial consequences of it, as a lot of families, particularly those in casual employment, in hospitality, retail, travel, have been so impacted. Those in more precarious work, gig economy and the like have been challenged. And so it has shown this generation that having savings and having a secure job and being prepared for the rainy day is an important thing. Prior to COVID, we had a generation of young people that were living for the now and that saw the economy always heading up, hadn't experienced a recession, and really, saw that they had the choice of jobs and they were in the power seat when it came to choosing the job as a candidate. That's all been changed. And we've seen at this early age a generation almost like their grandparents who saw the tough years after World War II, who've seen some recessions. They, like those older generations, now are valuing security and financial conservatism and savings and again, the secure job. So that's profoundly changed their outlook, and it's given them a new focus that, yes, you can have flexibility around where you work, but in ensuring a secure job and indeed being able to create your own job so that you've got a fallback option does matter. They've seen the benefit of that education as being an extra support, and I think for the unsettled, ambiguous, complex, and volatile future, education and the security it brings for a future, as well as developing those broader skills, has just been reinforced as essential.
That's really, really profound, and I really appreciate that. I think that the more and more that we kind of study this, and part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on the podcast is that I think that I'm still, in the last probably 3 years, I was still having some clients that were just trying to figure out, oh, you mean we're not talking about millennials anymore, we're talking about Generation Z. I like to get everybody ahead of the curve, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to do so. And while I'm talking about that, I just want to make sure that I mention a book that you've recently released. I think you told me that you did a virtual book release yesterday in Sydney. It's called Generation Alpha: Understanding Our Children and Helping Them Thrive. It's by Mark McCrindle with Ashley Fell. I downloaded my copy on Amazon. I know that they have both the Kindle and the paperback version on Amazon here in the States. And so really excited about that. And I would encourage people that are listening that want to hear more or read more about what Mark and his firm's research have discovered about Generation Alpha. That's a great place to start. I guess one of the questions that I would have for you, Mark, is if we ever have someone had a question for you or just wanted to connect, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, the simple way, the book is called Generation Alpha. And if people go to generationalpha.com, you'll find great resources there that we've put up, and you can get the book and other information from that site. And our business is McCrindle. And so McCrindle.com, you'll find a blog, lots of blogs and free information and infographics as well. And so either generationalpha.com or McCrindle.com, you can grab a lot more information about what we do and about this research that we conduct, and much of it is freely accessible on those sites. So I'd encourage people to look at that. And just to keep in mind, particularly for educators, that the focus is not just on the next program or on the next campaign, but it's got to be on the next generation. And as we further understand them, I think we can adjust and adapt and effectively engage with them, and resourcing ourselves to understand their world, their context, and who they are is going to help us out and ultimately help them out as well.
That's great. I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today, Mark. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is sponsored by Kaler Solutions, an education marketing and branding agency, and by Think Patented, a marketing execution, printing, and mailing provider of higher ed solutions. On behalf of my co-host, Troy Singer, I'm Bart Kaler. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to The Higher Ed Marketer. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening with Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a quick rating of the show. Simply tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. Until next time.